This session is on revision. You've each had a chance to read the untitled short story, taking a look at the feedback that was given to this student. And what this session is going to be is kind of talking through some of the major problems and some of the ways you could revise if this were your story and you were revising it. Okay? So essentially we have the I, so the main person telling the story is I. And we know about him that he has daughters and they're going through a bike ride in the park. Okay, that's kind of how they've set it up. So your exposition is revealed I and these daughters going through the park. They've also revealed this kind of hobo-like guy named Joe. And the little girls ask if he's a hobo or is he poor, things like that. And so they've kind of set up that there's the I telling the story with his daughters and the hobo Joe. And they're in the park. So that's the exposition. You could add more here, but we've got to determine who is this story really about. Okay? In the rising action, they've taken off through the park, and you've got one main thing happen. A little girl is on a bridge, looking over at the water, and she begins to fall off. Joe comes running across the water and saves her, which leads us to right here. Joe, run on water to save. Okay. And at the end you're left with this, how could he do that? So you've got not a lot of rising action, which doesn't build much. This story doesn't have a lot building up to this climax. And it's got something that's supernatural. So we begin to ask, so who is this story about? Is this story about Joe? Or is this story about the I? Is this story about the daughters observing this, the girl on the bridge? There's not enough in the story to determine that. So that's the first question we have to answer. Who is this story about? Okay. Now, the main character in any show is your protagonist. Okay. Some people are under the impression that your protagonist is your hero. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. The protagonist, by definition, is the character with the greatest arc. Character with the greatest emotional arc. Okay? Who goes through the changes? So in this story, who goes through any kind of a change? Does Joe? Well, if Joe was capable of doing this, and it seems the story is implying he's supernatural, he probably was in disguise and able to do this. So Joe doesn't really go through the change. And the girl on the bridge, we don't even know her name, so I don't think the story is really about her. So it kind of falls that the story is about this I, this main character here, I, becomes our main character. And so how is I changed as a course of seeing this? So there's no problem with having Joe come in and save the day, but how is that influencing I? So maybe we need to know more about who this I is. Who is this father? Is he skeptical of supernatural? Does he think this hobo guy? So what does he think of Joe? What does he think of the supernatural? What does he think about rescuing? What does he think about his girl's safety? And maybe that, once we know more about him, then maybe seeing this changes the I character, this father. Okay? So we got to make some decisions about the protagonist here and change those. So let's say we're going to make it about him. Let's say we're going to make him our protagonist. He's going to have the biggest arc. Let's say that he has an issue with believing that there's any supernatural intervention in the physical world. Let's say that's who this I is. So we have to set that up here in the exposition then. So somehow I have to set up here that my main character, I, this father, okay, has some resistance to believing the supernatural interacts with the physical world. With the physical world. Okay? You don't have to go this route. We're just going to, for the sake of being able to show some revision, we're going to say this is who this I is, this is his main issue. How are you going to show this? Because you can't just come out and tell us this. So you're going to have to set up something in the exposition that leads us to believe, okay, here's this guy, he's not sure he believes the supernatural world interacts with the physical world. That's not going to be easy to do, but somehow you have to do that in your exposition. And, or maybe somewhere between the beginning of your exposition and here, I have to get a feel for this, so that when Joe does the supernatural thing, I'm moved. This I is somehow changed. Okay? Maybe the girl on the bridge is his daughter. Maybe one of the girls rides ahead and she's on the bridge. Then you have higher stakes for the I, for the father, right? So this rising action, I can raise the stakes by just saying, okay, so I'm going to have one of the daughter rides ahead around the bend. So now dad's trying to catch up with her and keep track of the little one next to him. Then they get there and the daughter's standing on the side of the bridge. So now instead of it just being some girl we don't know, it's the daughter. So now we're taking this I, and we're going to take him through some emotional trauma. He starts out, we don't believe this, but he's kind of in a safe place. Or this is what he believes, he's in this safe place. Oh, now his daughter's ahead, and we don't know where she is. Oh, now she's on the railing. Oh, now she's going to be the one falling off. So this Joe interacting becomes something more impactful to this I. So our short story has to build. There should be something going on here. Whatever happens here should not only impact me reading it, but it should be affecting our protagonist, our main character. Because that's how I'm going to feel it. Otherwise, it's just like, oh, cool, Joe did that. And that's the end. But it needs to be, oh my gosh, Joe saved this guy's life. Because that would have been, he saved the daughter's life, and in retrospect, saves dead dad from whatever emotional trauma of losing your daughter. So see how we build this up and go? So when you come to revision, depending on your feedback, you've got to interpret and go, okay, so what is this feedback telling me? The feedback said, who's this story about? Who's your protagonist? Tell us more about them. And so you had to go and you look at, so who is my protagonist? And then what do they believe and how do I stretch that? How do I change that? He probably believes lots of other things, but it becomes irrelevant if our story is going to be about how Joe saves this girl falling off the bridge. Somehow supernatural has to tie into my main character there. Okay? So, depending on what you're revising, you have to consider what is the structure, whether it's a poem, whether it's your short story or creative nonfiction, what is the structure you have to follow, what is the feedback given, and how does it map with your story, and where are the things that need to change. Okay? So, happy rewriting!